Daniel J. Lewis here from the Audacity.podcast.com. I'm here to answer your podcasting questions live Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time over at theaudacitypodcast.com/live. That will take you to the latest link if you happen to be there. And if you're watching this live right now, feel free to ask a question in the comments below this video, and I'll try to address that in the video. Now, what's coming up in this? I've got some great questions that have already come in through email, and I'll address some of the questions that may come in through the chat room. Caleb wants to know about getting the podcast to display, his podcast to display properly in different podcast apps and make the show notes look better. Mitch wants to know about launching a podcast and the strategy to go along with that. And Paula wants to know about fixing some crackling sound in her audio. Now, an interesting behind-the-scenes thing. Facebook totally messed up something with this. So if you're watching this live, I'm going to spin the order of these questions around so you don't feel like you're watching the same thing over again. That way you can stick around for new questions to be answered. And if you want to hear me answer the stuff you may have already heard before Facebook Live messed up, then stick around for the end when I'll re-answer those questions. So starting then with Paula's question. Paula hosts the podcast Chatting with the Experts. She said, I would like to find out about how to remove crackling sounds in audio. I recently recorded a podcast at a recording studio and had this problem. Have not solved it. Well, first of all, recording in a recording studio, they should not have that problem. So if you got a bad recording from them, you need to talk to them, not only because maybe they need to be the ones to fix it, but there might even be a case where they have a problem in their setup they need to fix. They may even need to refund some money to you because they didn't deliver on the quality you expected from them, from their recording studio and their setup and that kind of thing. So there might be some issues there to try and work out with the recording studio. And if all else, then just don't go back to that studio. But so you have audio already recorded. Let's talk about how to fix that, and then I'll give you some tips on how to prevent that problem from happening again in the future. If you're getting crackling sound in your audio, it's some kind of interference or bad connection somehow. So what you need to look for is a tool to process and try and clean up the audio. There are some advanced tools, and I can't recommend a specific one. It really depends on what software you're using. There may be some tools that can do this in an automated way, but what you want to look for would be something like Repair Audio, Click Removal, Declicker, something like that. Adobe Audition has a pretty good one. Audacity, maybe you might have to find a separate plugin. Other programs might require additional plugins. So it's something you may be able to reduce, or you may have to spend a lot of time, maybe some money on hiring a professional editor to be able to fix that audio for you using their expertise. Like Chris Curran from Podcast Engineering School is an expert with podcast engineering and audio mastering, and he might be able to fix this for you. Now, it does cost, that kind of thing. If you want to try and fix it yourself, look for those plugins inside of your editing software that may enable you to fix that kind of thing. Make sure you go back to the raw audio you got from the studio, though, just in case there's a chance that somewhere along the way you made some conversion or did a process and you introduced the clicking into the audio. You want to make sure that your actual original recording doesn't contain that clicking. If you can, you may want to consider simply re-recording. If your audio was corrupted, it may take less time for you, and you might even get a better sounding episode to go back and redo the whole thing than to spend the time, the money, the resources, the frustration, all of that to try and fix the audio that you got. Isotope RX is a great one. Danny Stern in the chat just mentioned that, and it does a good job. The Isotope is one of the best repair tools, and they just came out with a new version. Isotope 6, I believe, is their tool. So that's IZOTOPE, Isotope RX. It is a great tool, and it does cost a bit. but you might be able to find some slightly cheaper versions or hire someone to fix that for you. Now, how do you prevent this in the future from happening? It's tough because podcasts have many different pieces to them that could potentially mess up. So the main things to look for would be, for one, your phone is a big culprit to interference, especially phones on AT&T, Cricket, certain other providers that are on GSM. Those can cause certain issues with interference, often making a little sound in the recording, but it can cause other interference too, as well as even Verizon sometimes. Like on my Verizon phone, which I have Verizon, an iPhone, I've noticed sometimes in the past when my phone is sitting next to my audio equipment, there would be no problem until I received a text message, and then there would be a little bit of interference in the recording. So either put your phone away from the equipment, put your phone on not do not disturb, but airplane mode, or simply move it far away enough from the equipment and away from cables. Don't set your phone on cables. Now, that's the other thing to consider is keep power cables away from your audio cables, and maybe even consider putting data cables away from your audio cables, depending on what kind of data cable it is. The more digital the cable is, like for example, Lightning or USB, Thunderbolt, that kind of thing, those are highly digital, then that's probably fine. But if it's an analog signal like an audio cable or a VGA cable, audio analog video cable, that kind of thing might cause some problem. These kinds of cables overlapping with audio cables can cause some interference, especially power cables on audio cables. The other thing to look for would be loose connections or a bad cable. I've had instances in my studio before where a little adapter maybe has a slightly loose connection. So if the cable wasn't sitting just perfectly in the adapter, then that signal would either get some static or it would be a much lower volume or just didn't sound right compared to the other channels. Also look for how you're interfacing with other equipment and what other equipment might be a problem. Like if you record into your computer via USB, that USB device could be the problem. It could be drivers or lack of drivers on your computer could be the problem. It could be a program running on your computer. I discovered this recently where I was recording a podcast episode and I looked over at my recorder and I noticed my soundtrack channel, because I play my music into a separate channel from my voice. That way I can shift things around if I need to. But the soundtrack channel, I kept seeing this little blip every couple of seconds. I couldn't hear it as we were talking, but I could see it on the recorder. I knew something was going on wrong, and it was something related to my computer. The crazy thing it was my browser. Something in my browser was causing a clicking noise to go through the equipment. And I think it was a particular website that was employing a slightly shady technique to keep that website active, and so that Chrome wouldn't give it lower CPU usage or priority and that kind of thing. And I think maybe what they were doing is that little clicking sound was causing it. Or it could be that the website was live refreshing, kind of like a heartbeat sort of thing, and that was causing some kind of interference. But in my experiment, limited experiment, because this is not 100% repeatable for me, I quit the browser and the clicking stopped. I restarted the browser and the clicking was not there. Even though I reloaded all of the exact same web pages, the clicking was not there. So I don't know, but that's the type of thing to look for. Watch out for certain programs running, especially anything that's CPU intensive, like videos playing or high intensity kind of stuff that could cause some distortions in the audio depending on what's recording the audio. And then the other thing is make sure all your cables are plugged in properly, your cables are in good condition, that kind of thing. Most likely, I'm going to guess it was some kind of interference on the line. And when you start getting into ground loop problems and electrical interference, it can be really tricky to diagnose and could even be expensive. So if you've already recorded your audio and re-recording is not an option, that's my first suggestion. Consider if the audio is bad enough that you can't afford to pay someone to fix it, I suggest consider re-recording. Every time I have re-recorded an episode, either because I messed up on something technologically or because I just, at the end of the episode, I felt like, that episode didn't go very well. Every time I re-recorded, I felt so much happier with the re-recording because my presentation felt better, my energy was better. I fixed whatever mental issue I was having that was preventing me from communicating as clearly as I wanted to. And this very live recording might be an example of that because I've had to restart this recording due to a Facebook glitch. And when I re-answer the question that I received earlier, but I re-answer it later in this video, then you might see that maybe my second time around is more concise, better thought through, that kind of thing. By the way, Isotope RX is on sale this month, May 2017. Well, it's May 1st today, so I actually can't say for certain it is on sale. I know it was on sale in April, but these kinds of things do go on sale, and Isotope 6 is a new version, so it might be on sale because of being so new. Steve Sleeper said, Daniel, we recorded one of our podcasts as a Facebook Live, assuming you didn't lose internet. Same thing happened to us last week in that Facebook bumped us off for no reason. We didn't know about it until someone commented. Yeah, stuff happens. That's why, as much as possible, always have a backup and don't rely on your live experience being the thing. There could be other things going on in the background that could be related to why some of this kinds of stuff fails at certain times. Okay, next question came from Mitch. Mitch said, I'm about to launch my podcast. I have 27 episodes recorded and most are mastered. Many have their transcripts already complete. I have a website that needs a little more love and attention, a Libsyn account, and I'm about to register my RSS feed. I've never launched a podcast before. Outside of sending a bunch of social media posts using eClincher, which is what I'm using, what else can I do to spread the word? Yes, my guests will be spreading the word as well, but there has to be more I can do. Now, Mitch, I need to give you a little bit of a reality check. It sounds like you're following a particular formula that some people will claim puts them on fire with their podcast, but generally, when there are certain formulas, when people say, oh, this is the formula for podcast success, you have to be careful with some of that because it may be the formula that worked for them at a particular time. It may not work the same for you. And in fact, often these formulas don't work the same for other people. Someone might have been, in a sense, lucky in that they did the right thing at the right time. So anyone else who tries to do that right thing is no longer doing it at the right time, so they may not be as fortunate with their launch, even though they're following the exact same formula. So be careful with some of those formulas from people that preach only one particular formula as the master for everything. And part of what kind of concerns me with this is you said you have 27 episodes already recorded, mostly mastered. You have transcripts. I'm not a fan of transcripts. You have some other stuff ready to go, except you haven't launched your podcast officially yet. And it's an interview-based show. A problem with launching or having so many episodes pre-recorded, especially if these are supposed to be weekly episodes, is it means your ability to implement change and respond to feedback is significantly hindered. Your accessibility to your audience, your engagement with your audience. If you have 27 episodes recorded and you launch with 3 and you've got the other 24 then scheduled for the next 24 weeks, what if after your first 3 episodes you receive enormous amounts of feedback from people saying, this is a problem you need to fix in your episode? Well, you'd have to go back and edit those 24 episodes, unpublish them, unschedule them, re-upload them, do all of that kind of stuff. Or it could be that maybe due to your workflow, you may not be able to implement any change or even include anyone's feedback or engage with your audience in any way for another 24 episodes when you start to catch up, and you'd then forever be 24 episodes behind, potentially. So those are some things to think about cautiously, that even if you have 27 interviews recorded and mostly edited, make sure you have some margin, some flexibility that if you decide to do things a little bit differently, you can still change that. And don't worry about launching with a certain number of episodes and such. It can be nice for people to get a better idea of what your podcast is about. It's easy for them to get more engaged with your podcast if you launch with a few episodes. But it's not going to help you to rank better. It's not going to help you appear new and noteworthy. It's not going to help you in any of these mythical, magical ways. It may help you, though, with your audience. You could launch with one episode and succeed. Many people do. Some people launch with many episodes and don't succeed. So be careful with that and keep that in mind. So now, how do you leverage what you have to be able to make a big launch? Again, I have to go back to a premise is your launch is not what will make or break your podcast. It's like saying the quality of your wedding determines the quality of your marriage. It's not true. A wedding is a great thing. It's wonderful to celebrate. It's wonderful to remember. It's great to look back on. It's great to get a lot of other people involved in, and it's worth celebrating all of that. And your launch of your podcast is worth celebrating. You've worked hard. You finally started this thing. You've clicked publish. Now you have something actually out there to promote. Your product of your podcast is available to people. But if your launch doesn't go well, if you don't get featured in the mythical unicorn magic of iTunes New and Noteworthy, if you don't rank in the charts, if you don't get a lot of ratings and reviews, it doesn't mean your podcast is a failure. All it means is you didn't get those things. Your podcast can still be a success. It can still be a huge success without any of that stuff. You don't have to rely on that stuff to be able to make your podcast a success. You are the biggest influencer for your success. And your audience is the measurement of that. So you could be featured in all of the best places, but if your podcast is horrible and people don't care about it, then it doesn't matter where you're featured. So what can you do to make your launch a bigger splash, to make it a more celebratory event? Definitely leverage your guests. You might have emails already scheduled out to let them know when their episode is published. And when you say your guests will be spreading the word as well, make it as absolutely easy as possible for them. Give them maybe suggested tweets or social posts that they could share and put it in their language. Like if you interviewed me on your podcast, don't send me a tweet back that you want me to share that says, "Here, Daniel J. Lewis on so-and-so's podcast." Well, why would I speak about myself in the first person? I wouldn't. I would want to say something like, "Hear me talk about blah, blah, blah on such and such podcast." So put it in their language. Make sure the tweet length and all of that fits. You don't want to give them text that doesn't fit into their Twitter program or their social posts, anything like that. Equip them. Make it as simple as possible. And don't nag them about it, because your success does not depend on them. Your success depends on you and your audience. So focus more on your audience than on your guests, because it's all about the value you bring to your audience. And that relationship there, mutual profit, you profit, they profit, everyone profits. Other ways that you can leverage this, if you have any kind of influence already, an email list, social followings, a Facebook group, Facebook page, network contacts, anything like that, definitely let them know about this. Now, don't spam people. And it's a fine line to determine that. So don't go through your entire address book and contact everyone telling them about your podcast. Contact the people who would care. Maybe you have an email list already, regardless of the size of it. And these are people that know you to some degree already. They're interested in things you're doing. Definitely tell them about your podcast. You can make your podcast part of an autoresponder sequence. Like maybe so many weeks after someone subscribes to your email newsletter, they receive an email automatically that tells them about your podcast and gives them the links to subscribe, and give them an Android link and an Apple link, by the way, as well as linking directly to your website. Don't worry about pushing them toward one particular place in order for you to rank better or appear in the mythical unicorn magic of new and noteworthy. Focus on making it easy for them to get your podcast and what is in it for them. Focus on giving that value. Also, go to communities. Go where your ideal audience is. Build authority in those places. Build influence so that when you have something of some value you've already created elsewhere, if you share it there, they will see it as you're giving value because you've already been giving value, and here's yet another way you're giving value. It's kind of like if we're friends and you bring over a dish that looks delicious and you give it to me, I'll trust you and I'll be very grateful for that dish. But if you're some stranger I've never met before and you say, hey, here's some free candy, I brought this for you, I might be a little suspicious of that and wouldn't trust that that gift is worth anything. See, it's a matter of the relationship that we have before you're bringing something that you feel is some kind of gift to me. Caleb asked, my podcast, Caleb is host of the Only You Forever podcast, and he said, my podcast is due to be ticking over the 500,000 download mark today, which is great. Yes, that is huge. Big congratulations. I'm pretty sure from the way that he writes this, he knows that doesn't mean 500,000 people. That's just of all of his episodes, all of them have been downloaded 500,000 times. And he said we get 7,000 to 9,000 downloads per week. That's also cool. But the downloads per time period thing, by the way, doesn't matter. It's a meaningless metric. He said, I started in May 2014 targeting the marriage niche. To me, this is a relatively successful accomplishment, but the one thing that has eluded me is the appearance of the podcast in a player. In Overcast, which is a podcast app on iOS, if I go to the Freedom Fast Lane podcast by Ryan Daniel Morin and hit the little I on an episode, he has a very nicely formatted blurb, often with images. Mine is ugly. I don't know where or how to do that. It's a small detail, but I think it would make my podcast look more professional. I'd love to hear something about making your feed look awesome. Now, Caleb, the unfortunate thing about this is there's no universal way that all of the podcast apps do this. There is a universal way to put information in your podcast RSS feed, and all of this information, well, most of it, comes from your RSS feed with very few exceptions. So this stuff needs to go into whatever is creating your RSS feed. That is never FeedBurner. Not just because FeedBurner is questionable in many areas, but FeedBurner does not create RSS feeds. It's whatever is going into FeedBurner if you use FeedBurner, but you don't have to use it. So think of Libsyn for your RSS feed if you're using Libsyn, or PowerPress or something else. Whatever is creating that original RSS feed, what goes into there is what goes out to the podcast apps in most cases, and I'd say 99% of the cases. So let me show you an example of this. If I go to the Audacity to Podcast in the podcast app and look at my latest episode, I see a wide image and my show notes. Now, in most podcast apps, if you want to see the notes that go along with the episode, usually you would tap or swipe on the cover art for that particular episode. You might need to display that episode full screen in some way in order to get that information. There might also be a little I button nearby that you could tap that, and that would show you the full notes. Like in Overcast, for example, if an episode is playing, I swipe right to left on the cover art, and it displays then the notes for that episode. It used to be that you would swipe up. In the podcast app for iOS, the Apple Podcast app, that is, the way that you get to those notes is if you're playing an episode, you have to tap on the episode that's down at the bottom of the screen, and it brings it up full screen, and then you tap on the cover art, and it displays the notes that come along with that episode. Now, one thing to note in this, well, there are many things to note. So first thing I'll point out is that on the Apple Podcast app, there is no image at the top of my notes. Whereas in the Overcast app, there is a wide image at the top of my notes. That image, as well as these notes themselves, are coming from the RSS feed, specifically from the content encoded tag in the RSS feed. So what feeds that is the body text of your post in whatever is creating your RSS feed. So if you're using PowerPress, this would be your WordPress post and the body content for that post. If you're using Libsyn to create your RSS feed, not only host your media, but creating your RSS feed, then this is what goes into the description or that body content field inside of Libsyn. That's what will then go out to the podcast apps. Overcast will display an image that's in your notes, not videos, but it will display images. The podcast app, at least right now, the Apple Podcast app, will not display images. Both apps will display some other limited formatting, like bullet points may display nicely. For example, they display nicely. Bullet points or numbered points display nicely in the iOS podcast app. But in Overcast, although bullet points do display, they are not nicely indented, so they look like a bulleted list where everything is aligned differently and there's space on the left side. That doesn't happen with Overcast. Hyperlinks usually do work now in most apps, as well as bold, italics, but not certain things like headline formats or video embeds or special colors or special fonts or that kind of thing. It's a very clean, basic view of your feed, very simple to what, or very similar to what you would see in a podcast RSS reader, like, or as any kind of standard RSS reader, that is, like Feedly, something like that, would display a very basic version of your RSS feed and maybe include embedded pictures. So you put that inside of your post, and that's what might display in Overcast, but might not display in others. See, there are 3 different pieces of text inside your RSS feed that may be pulled from in order to get that text into the player. And there's an order. Actually, there are now 4 places, sort of, for one particular app. There is an order to these things. There is the iTunes summary field, which most apps support. Google Play even has a Google Play description field, but if that's not present, they fall back to the iTunes summary field. This holds up to 4,000 characters, and that is what displays on desktop iTunes. It does not display anymore in the mobile app when you've downloaded an episode and you're listening to it. It used to, but no longer it does it. If that's not present, sometimes the description tag will be displayed. That's a short paragraph or so of content, very similar to the iTunes summary tag. If that doesn't display, then maybe it would be the content tag. And the content tag has no limit to how much content could be in it. Now, publishers may limit the content to say only the excerpt displays, not the full article. But if you want to display the full article, the content encoded tag can hold that. So inside of Overcast, it is getting all of this information and the image from the content encoded tag. The podcast app for iOS is also getting the content, the text content from that content encoded tag. So what you want to display in that, you have to put in your content and then make sure that tag is being displayed in your RSS feed. But don't rely on that, especially like if you're telling your audience, yeah, tap on the cover art to see, or swipe on the cover art to see photos of this. You can't rely on that because not every app implements it in the same way. Overcast does a pretty good job, but it fails in some ways. The podcast app does a pretty good job, but it fails in some other ways. Other apps may do a good job here, not a good job there, and may display images, may not. So think of it as it's added value for those who might stumble across it. And hyperlinks are more universally supported. So you may be able to say to people, if you tap or swipe on the cover art in your app, you might be able to simply tap on the link there. But also point them back to your website with a simple show notes URL like myawesomepodcast.com/Daniel J. Lewis or something like that. That's simple, memorable, that they can go to for getting those links that you mentioned. And your results may vary because there are a lot of different factors on this, and these kinds of things do change. It wasn't that long ago that the podcast app prioritized the iTunes summary field instead. So if you had text in the summary field, but not, or if you had text in the summary field and in the main content field, then the podcast app used to display it from the summary, not from the content. Now it seems to be the other way around, which is just crazy how they change these things, but that's the nature of stuff. So always look at it as added value, an extra way to engage with your audience. It's not necessarily a way, and most likely is not a way for you to be able to grow your audience, because it's what your existing subscribers would see, not people who are interested in subscribing. Now, by the way, I've shown with my podcast new podcast cover art, which that's my episode image looking cover art. If I switch back to iTunes, they display the show level artwork for individual episodes. And I'm really happy with the new cover art for the Audacity podcast. I've been sitting on this for a while, but kept waiting, thinking, I want the website to match. Finally, I just decided, I'm just going to launch this, and I'll get the new website working soon, and I'll get it caught up at some point. Christopher J. Nessie said, I started including images in my show notes, but sometimes under the image, it shows code for the image as well. That can happen based on plugins you may be using on your website. I think Jetpack might be one that causes that, or maybe some other plugin is causing that. So look at, maybe even your theme causes that. Look at anything that's doing stuff with your images, and that might be the cause of that extra HTML code displaying below your image inside of the podcast apps. Well, that's it for now. If you have any other questions that you'd like me to address in a future live video, then definitely come back to theaudacitypodcast.com/live on on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Theaudacitypodcast.com/live will always take you to the correct place. And also you can send questions or tweet me or things. Watch for my posts, watch for my emails and such, where I ask you for those questions. And it really helps if you can make the question concise. It's easier for me to be able to digest, to be able to share with you. If you are interested in improving your podcast, then the best way to do that is with a special site that I've created called Podcasters Society. This is a membership community for podcasters. So there's nothing about how to launch your podcast. If you don't have a podcast yet, this community is not for you. If you have a podcast and you want to make it better, whether that's better for simply the sake of making it better as your hobby and the artistic aspect of it, or maybe you want to make it better so that you can earn more money from it, you can grow your audience, whatever the case, you want to grow and improve your podcast, then Podcaster Society is definitely for you. It's closed to new members right now, but if you go to podcastersociety.com, you can enter your name and email address and join the waiting list, and then I'll let you know when it's open again for new members. I've closed it because I really wanted to do some renovation in the back end. We've got a lot of resources now, and it was starting to become too much. That was hard to navigate, hard to find the exact resources. So I'm really excited about the new organization of things. Like, for example, one of the things that's going into it is if you click on the WordPress page, you would see all the tutorials related to WordPress, all of the courses, all of the lessons, all of the third-party resources, all of the possible discounts on things related to WordPress, all of the webinars related to WordPress, all of the forum posts related to WordPress, that kind of thing. Everything that's tagged with that keyword, you'd be able to see from that one page. So it would make it much easier to find things, or audio editing, or growing your audience, or stuff like that. Makes it much easier to navigate that information, as well as new courses, new content being added. Just last week, we brought into it the name of the course is Engage Your Peeps. It's all about creating better engagement with your audience through social media. Some fantastic tips. That's from our podcast sponsorship expert, Jessica Kupferman. And this week or next week, we'll be launching a course on a simple workflows and tools for recording people through Skype and such. So I'm really looking forward to that and much more value coming. That's at podcastersociety.com. Join the waiting list and you'll be notified when it's open to new members. And you might even get early access before anyone else does. So that's at podcastersociety.com. I hope to see you there. Hope you can join the waiting list and hope you can eventually join the community when you have your podcast and you're ready to take your podcast from average to amazing. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast.com. Thank you for joining me and keep podcasting. And I hope that you'll join me again for the upcoming another live thing that I'll do on the next Monday, Eastern Time, over at theaudacitytopodcast.com/live. Bye.